Okay, cool. Cool. So I am working on a project, or was working on a project and continuing to work on a project all about personas. And I want to kind of start by just giving a quick overview. These are kind of the things I'm going to be talking about: a quick introduction, some goals, kind of how the process went, and then some challenges I faced throughout my process. And then finally, just a quick summary. My colleague just messaged me, good luck today. Sorry about that. Anyway, so quick introduction. All of this kind of starts with just a quick story I wanted to share. A few years ago, I was working with our student government team as they were starting to build a plan around voter and civic engagement. And some of the students, who were super involved and kind of really only travel in circles of other super involved students, were sort of wondering how they could get in touch with students that are maybe commuter students or don't have that same level of involvement. And they asked themselves this question, like, how can we get to different kinds of students? UCF is a massive campus. We have something like 70,000 students across a variety of campuses. So this is not an easy question that they are asking themselves. So we kind of were trying to throw this around a little bit. And the idea that we came up with is could we actually develop some personas? Could we come up with some different types of student personas that would really help not just our student leaders, but our professional staff really reach those students from a variety of places across campus? So that was the original idea. Some questions that I asked myself as I was thinking about this is, how might we identify different types of engagement for students? That's somewhat scalable, right? What might work for one student might not work for another student. So we need to be thinking about a multitude of perspectives. And then how do we center student leadership in this process? On our campus, as I'm sure it's on many of yours, student leaders are central to the work that we do. We're really nowhere without them. So we really needed to make sure that they were a big part of the puzzle too. So you'll see here, these are some topics that I kind of wanted to focus on when I would kind of focus on my process, barriers, opportunities. How do students even define their communities? This was my most exciting question I wanted to ask students. What does community mean to you? And how do you define that? How do you articulate that to yourself? And then what kind of support can be helpful from the institution? And then ultimately, what ideas do they have that maybe we haven't thought of yet, or maybe ideas of how we can improve our structure already? So as I was doing this work, this was my process. I started to kind of put some structure around planning. I had a billion conversations with Maddie. They were incredibly helpful to me to kind of help figure out what this process would actually look like. And we decided that it would be best to do some interviews. These were 1-to-1 interviews, 2-to-1 interviews, and then potential for larger kind of focus group interviews. We also wanted to do some outreach. So this would be to key student leaders, key professors that we thought might get us into spaces on campus that maybe we hadn't been to yet. So that's when we actually started to schedule some of these things. I actually did some of these this summer. I was able to accomplish 10 of them. And more on that here in a second, but that was definitely something I wanted to do, about 40 to 50 just to get a wide enough swath of students, but more on that in a second. My goal was to compile all of this, start to come up with trends and different themes that I was seeing, and then ultimately start to create my personas. And then also including some reflection. Am I asking the right questions? Am I engaging the right students? And what voices are missing, right? Because we know that usually if we're doing this work, we're probably not always reaching the voices or all the voices that we should be reaching. So these are, this is what I did. I created an intake form. I'll show you that here in a second, just to kind of help me collect some of these responses. These are the things I included on the intake form. And I sort of use this as a jumping off point. It kind of helped me structure my conversations with students while also helping me sort of go down different tributaries of different things that the students wanted to talk about, right? Not every student had the same response, so they kind of wanted to talk about different things, but this was the general structure that I used. I also created space for significant quotes or stories or trends that I maybe wanted to follow in future interviews. So it was really, really helpful to kind of have a space specifically for that. So with that, I included just a quick visual of what I used. This will probably be jazzed up in the future. This is very, very basic looking. So that being said, I want to just talk about some challenges in my process. First, I really kind of struggled to figure out what it was I wanted to learn, because it felt like there was so much potential with this. What was the best structure and what's the best process? So I kind of had a hard time arriving to some of those pieces. I got COVID during this process, which, was a challenge for me. I missed a lot of key time that I wish I could have dedicated to this program or to this project. So hopefully making that up soon, but that was a huge challenge of mine. Also, I would say the number of students on campus when I was building this was super limited. I was doing it towards the end of the semester, and a lot of our students were either, in finals or ready to leave campus. So I did get a chance to meet with a wide variety of students though. So I felt like that was super, super helpful. And I've listed out who some of those folks were. At a certain point after I got back from COVID, I sort of had a revelation of like, oh, if we're actually going to be putting this persona, data forward, I need IRB approval for this probably. So I stopped myself midway through and I was like, oh, I should probably pause here and check in with the university. I did hear that I did need IRB approval to publish any of this or to use any of their data. So I stopped, but I did feel like the process of going through this was extremely, extremely helpful. If I would have been able to create personas to kind of put forward to you all rather than just use internally, this is the structure that I would have used. I really thought, like, I used a lot of the stuff that Maddie had presented before in the human-centered design presentation, but a lot of the things that I added were like peer-to-peer engagement strategies and then staff engagement strategies, because it felt like I kind of wanted this to be usable by both staff and by students, student leaders. I guess in summary, my goal is to continue this work. I think it's super important that we be theorizing and strategizing on ways that a multitude of people can have conversations and entry points with just random students, right? Tabling isn't always going to be effective. So how do we diversify some of the ways that we get connected to students? I think through these interviews, I learned so much about the ways students talk about their communities, the things that they're excited about, and then ways that maybe they're a little apprehensive. One student in particular talked about how voting makes her really nervous. She's like, I don't feel as educated. So like when I go to the polls, I'm just not quite like confident with what I'm doing. Another student talked about barriers to access to community is like, I'm an international student and sometimes language is a huge barrier, right? So I don't always fully feel confident. So it's things like that that really kind of were helpful in these interviews processes. And I think as I continue to do this work, it would be hugely important to kind of cultivate and tweak some of the questions to speak to a wider range of people. Just in final things, I just wanted to thank Maddie for all of the support I received through the process. Thank you so much, Maddie. And if anybody has any questions, ideas, ways to improve this, I am all ears and ready for your feedback. Thanks, everybody.